DeLauné Michel was raised in a South Louisiana literary family that includes her first cousin, Andre
Diffuse.
Dubois, Dubois, like abuse,
Yeah.
Dubois, and second cousin, James Lee Burke. While working as an actor in Los Angeles in 1996. What else would you do in Los Angeles?
Right. Thank you.
I know how you get back into Los Angeles.
I love you. I know.
Delaney created the critically acclaimed reading series Spoken Interludes to sold out audiences that continue today. She then developed, taught in, and continues to run outreach writing programs for at-risk youth in inner city schools, juvenile situations, and prisons in New York and LA. Thank you, Delaney, for your work. The first story Ms. Michel wrote won the Thomas Wolfe Short Fiction Award. Her nonfiction work has been featured on NPR, and her first two novels were published by HarperCollins. She is currently working on a memoir. Please welcome DeLauné Michel.
Thank you. No, that was so sweet of you to read. It gave me a few minutes to pull myself together. And we'll see if I did. I don't really think I have, but that's all right. So this is from the memoir that I'm working on that's in progress. And I thought it was called The Mattress Ball, and now it's not. So we'll see. But I really appreciate y'all being here tonight and hearing this. Means a lot, as I appreciate y'all hearing Noel and Jean's stories. Okay. There were two things my mama never was: still or quiet. So when I got home from my trip on New Year's Day and walked into the terrible rental house we'd been living in since she left Daddy a few months before, and I saw her sitting in the living room, not moving or saying a word, I worried she'd had some kind of stroke. Then she turned, and the rage on her face made me realize it was me who was going to have one. And all my 15 years, Mama had never waited before screaming at me, so I'd never been more afraid, especially since I didn't know what it was this time. Sit down. Her voice was as rigid as her posture in the wing chair her best friend had lent us since Daddy hadn't let Mama take anything when we left. The furniture Helen had sent from her boutique was like ours at home, but it was so much nicer than the wood panel dark rental house that it just ended up making the place look worse, like Gone with the Wind furniture on a Grapes of Wrath set. As I sat on the sofa, Mama said, "Are you having an affair with Frank Mercado?" I nearly slipped off the smooth silk seat. It felt like she had thrown a grenade of Frank at me, and the sharp points of everything that had been happening since last fall were exploding inside me. A few months before, at the beginning of the fall, when I had started 10th grade, my 4 older sisters all moved away for college or for careers, and Mama left Daddy, taking me with her. In the South Louisiana world that I grew up in, my parents were famous, appearing regularly in the State Times Society pages for their parties, or just in at-home photos with their 5 daughters, including my first appearance in one at 3 months old. Daddy's family started in Louisiana with Captain Jacques Michel, Louis XIV's ambassador to New Orleans, while Mama's family included Commodore Perry and her grandfather, Walter Burke, a senator who intimidated even Huey Long. In addition to Daddy's magnetic business savvy and Mama's Elizabeth Taylor-esque beauty, plus the popular newspaper columns she wrote on marriage and family, they were civic leaders and art patrons who led renowned marriage retreats for the Catholic diocese. So the shattering of Beth and Melvin Michel's perfect family immediately became Baton Rouge society's favorite long-running scandal. Adults I hardly knew would stop me to tell me with barely concealed glee the latest gossip about them that they'd heard, while my parents used me in the divorce like 2 cats batting around a half-dead mouse. 8 weeks of this, after Mama and I moved out, I had a nervous breakdown. My therapist pulled me from 10th grade at the private all-girl Catholic high school I attended to get a rest, but I still plunged into a suicidal depression. All I longed for was a shoulder to cry on, and I really hated that I did. I couldn't believe that phrase, that cliche, a shoulder to cry on, was actually a real thing a person could crave. And I tried everything I could to not need that. Mama had told me when we moved out that it was fine with her for me to smoke, so I quickly worked up to a pack a day. She also included me when her friends would come over for cocktails almost nightly. Around them, I was treated like another fabulous divorcee, but once they left, Mama screamed at me like I was her scullery maid. As desperately as I tried to deaden myself with cigarettes and gin, I couldn't escape that longing for a shoulder to cry on. And Frank had been pursuing me since August. He was the much older brother of Sam, a hairdresser I modeled for, who, well, he looked like he could fill in for Michelangelo's David statue if it ever needed a rest. He was like that. I was in love with Sam and dreamed of being with him when I finally finished high school. But every time I went by the salon to see Sam, Frank was there, and he'd run out after me to talk by my car. He wasn't gorgeous like Sam. He was cute, tousled hair and dark eyes that would stare into mine with this warmth that I had gotten so unused to seeing, it would almost stop my breath. Then he'd take my hand between his strong ones, holding them, and promise me he'd be the best friend I'd ever have if I let him. I wasn't stupid. I knew what he meant. And the idea of committing adultery, actually even just having sex, terrified me, especially since the only 2 times I'd ever had sex was when I was raped, once by Frank soon after I met him in August, when he plied me with drinks at a party. But I also knew that if I didn't get a shoulder to cry on, I was going to kill myself or go crazy. And they both kind of seemed about the same. So I decided I would just see Frank for a little bit until I could get a hold of myself, and then I'd stop before my soul was ruined and before anyone found out. But Mama, of course, found out after only about 2 weeks. As I sat on the couch across from her, Mama's blue eyes stared down into my soul, and I knew she could see how dark it had already gotten from my sin. "Are you having an affair with him?" she asked again. There was no way I could hide from her. "Yeah." She nodded. "Well, your phone kept ringing while you were gone, so I answered it. Frank thought I was you, then hung up when he realized I wasn't, but I heard enough. I recognized his voice from when he cleaned up the backyard here." Mama didn't say like a common laborer, but she didn't have to. For Mama, that was almost as unforgivable as everything else. In early October, not long after we moved into the rental house, I got home from school one day, and Mama told me that the owner had finally listened to her complaints and sent a man over to haul all the debris away that was out back. When Mama went outside to tell this man what to do, Frank introduced himself to her. So she said, "Oh, are you related to Sam Mercado, the hairdresser I modeled for?" "Of all people to clean out the yard," Mama had said to me as I leaned against the counter in the empty kitchen, since Helen hadn't lent us the breakfast table and chairs. Such a funny coincidence, Sam's older brother. Hearing Sam's name was like turning on the radio when a Rolling Stones song came on from an album I wished I had, and for those moments it felt like I did. "Frank said he met you," Mama said. Sam screeched to a halt in my head. Mama was near the stove, but she hadn't taken her eyes off me. I opened the fridge, pretending to look for food, even though we both knew I wouldn't eat. "Did he?" Mama walked over and shut the fridge door, her face close to mine. "I guess, maybe, the salon sometime." "Well, he certainly seemed to remember you." My chest sparked a deep red. I grabbed my school books from the counter and could feel Mama's eyes on me as I left the room. I've been trying to forget that Frank existed, just like I'd been trying to forget what had happened on that August night with him. But only hours earlier, while I had been at school, he was in the backyard. He'd even met Mama. I could picture him out there, hauling stuff around in his jeans and t-shirt, the way his muscles showed through them, same as he had worn that August night when he looked so out of place at that party for Sam's new salon. Same way Sam would have looked out of place cleaning out our backyard in a silk shirt and linen pants. "Well, DeLauné," Mama was sitting poised in the wing chair as though her rage was a new kind of posture. I was bracing myself for her screaming to begin. Then it hit me, maybe she already had been screaming about finding out that I was seeing Frank all that time that I was out of town. I thought of the hours-long phone calls she'd make every night that I had to listen to through the flimsy walls as she told half of Baton Rouge every detail of the divorce, always finishing with what a bastard my daddy was and how he didn't love me, never had, and her leaving him was all his fault. But at least I hadn't been home to hear that. But then I realized that since I had admitted to seeing Frank, the phone call I was going to have to hear was her calling the cops. And my stomach got woozy as I wondered what I was going to have to tell them, and then thinking about the trouble Frank was going to get in. Mama steepled her fingers together and looked at me over the cage of her hands. It's fine with me that you see Frank, she said. I'm not going to stop you. My eyes widened in shock as I stared at her, and she gazed at me with a cool defiance. I just hope you know what you're doing. And she got up and left the room. I listened as she walked down the hall and shut her bedroom door closed. Then all sounds of my mother stopped, as though she had vanished into a different realm and didn't exist anymore in the terrible rental house, or at least didn't exist anymore as my mother. 2 weeks later, in her popular newspaper column on marriage and child rearing, my mother wrote this. I think the way adults mislead youth about sex is the worst. Sex is not a casual encounter. It is a complex exchange of personalities, emotion, and commitment. While young people think they can mate freely without consequences, psychological research proves them wrong. Sex carries with it a kind of imprinting. As you grow older, you realize the effects of another person imprinted on you. I worry not only for my own children, but for all young people. But I wondered maybe she wasn't too worried about me. Thank you.